Shabbos Daf Mem Beis contains two Mishnayos. The first part of the Daf and the first Mishnah continue the discussion of Hilchos Bishul, cooking water. And the second Mishnah takes us into Halachos of Muktzah, which will take us to the end of the chapter. Now, we were in the middle of a discussion about Shmuel. The Gemara will try to figure out if he holds like Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda. That'll take us to a brisa. The brisa will introduce us to the concept of kli sheni, which is a vessel, a kli which received hot water. It did not cook the hot water itself. And we'll try to figure out what the cooking power of that kli sheni is. We will also discuss the concept of tata gavar, which means when you pour cold water into hot water or hot water into cold water, there's a battle between the cold and the hot. Which one is stronger, what's on the bottom or what's being poured? And then this will take us to the Mishnah, which will discuss the halachos of spices being put into a kli sheni. Are you allowed to put spices? Are you allowed to put salt? And then we'll get to the concept of muktzah, which will introduce us to two new concepts in muktzah, which we may not have heard before. One called the bitul kli mehechano, making an object muktzah that wasn't muktzah before Shabbos. And the second will be the concept of kli hanitel l'tzoyrech davar hamuktzah, which is a non-muktzah kli that you want to use for muktzah purposes. These will be two new ideas which we will discuss. Okay, so let's begin the daf. At the end of the previous daf, we had a discussion of Shmuel's opinion, and Shmuel seemed to be holding like the shita of Rabbi Shimon, who held that you're allowed to do a davar she'enim miskaven, a malacha which you do not intend to do. Now the Gemara is going to say, how could it be that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Shimon? We have a different case where Shmuel does not hold like Rabbi Shimon. What's that? That is about the halacha of malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. Let's just review. Malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa means you are doing a forbidden malacha, but you're not doing it for the purpose that it is intended for in the Mishkan. So, for example, if you dig a hole, and not because you want to have a hole, you dig a hole because you need some dirt, that's called malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. Rabbi Shimon holds that is only an Isser D'Rabbanan, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that is an Isser D'Oraisa. So, the case where Shmuel seems to hold like Rabbi Yehuda in this discussion against Rabbi Shimon is as follows. The halacha is that if you have a public danger, something which could potentially harm some people in the public thoroughfare, you're allowed to violate an Isser D'Rabbanan to get rid of it. So the case that's being discussed is if you have a coal, you have something hot which is in the street. So Shmuel says it depends what this hot thing is. If it's a hot piece of metal, then it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan to pour water on it and extinguish it, and therefore you're allowed to if it's in the street because it might hurt somebody. On the other hand, if you have a hot coal, a wood-burning hot coal, that's an Isser D'Oraisa to put out, and therefore you're not allowed to even if it's in the street. So now the Gemara says, but putting that out would be malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, because the purpose of putting things out in the Mishkan was the constructive purpose of creating charcoal. But here you're not trying to create charcoal, you're just trying to get rid of the heat. That's called malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa. According to Rabbi Shimon, malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa is only an Isser D'Rabbanan. If it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan, so then Shmuel should let you do it in order to protect the public, because it's in the street and you're allowed to violate Isser D'Rabbanan to protect the public. But Shmuel doesn't allow that. That means that Shmuel must hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that even though it's a malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, it's an Isser D'Oraisa, and therefore it's forbidden to do it, to put it out just to protect the public. And the Gemara says, okay, you're right. As far as malacha she'ein tzricha l'gufa, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and as far as davar she'enim miskaven, which is what we were talking about at the end of the previous daf, on that he holds like Rabbi Shimon. That's okay. He could hold like one in one subject and the other one in a different subject. Okay, now the Gemara brings a brisa, and this will take us into the discussion of kli sheni. Now let's just define here the terms that we need to know. Kli sheni is a cup or a vessel of some sort, a kli, which contains hot water, but that hot water wasn't heated in this kli. It was poured into this kli from the pot that it was heated in. Now we know that a kli sheni has less cooking power than a kli rishon. That's the pot that was on the fire. Not because it's cooler necessarily. Even if it is warmer than other kli rishons, it still has less cooking power due to the fact that its walls are cold. So that's one subject we have to be familiar with. The other one is that of tata gavar, which means that the lower one is stronger. Whenever you pour hot water into cold water, or cold water into hot water, there's a battle between the hot and the cold. The hot is trying to heat the cold water, and the cold is trying to cool the hot. The question is, which one will win? Which one will be able to affect the other one before the other one affects it? And the halacha of tata gavar says the lower one wins. So if you're pouring cold into hot, the hot will heat the cold before the cold cools the heat, and it'll end up cooking the cold water that was poured into it. If, however, you pour hot water into cold water, then the cold water, which is on the bottom, will cool the hot water before it gets in, and before it could heat the cold that it was poured into, and therefore it will not cook the cold water. So the Brisa says the following thing. It says that both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree that tato gavar, and therefore you're allowed to pour hot water into cold water. The cold water will win, and it won't cook. But it's forbidden to pour cold water into hot water because tato gavar says that the bottom water, the hot water, will win, and it'll cook the cold water that's poured into it. Now, all this is true, but Beis Shammai says that's only in a bathtub, which is self-heated, which is a kli rishon. It has its own heating. However, in a cup, which is a kli sheni, then there's no problem. You're allowed to pour even cold water into hot. That's what they dispute Beis Shammai on, the cup. Now the Brisa continues and it quotes a third opinion. Rav Shimon ben Manasseh says, no, it's also it's forbidden. Now, it's not clear immediately what Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is arguing on. Is he disagreeing with this business about the cup? And he's saying that the cup is not any better than the bathtub, or is he disagreeing with pouring hot water into cold water, which both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai said is okay? So we'll see about that later. For now, the Gemara wants to know, what about a bucket of water that you're using to wash your hands, your face, and your feet? Does that count as a cup, according to Beis Hillel, or does that count as a bathtub? Now, what's the question? So a cup has two advantages in this halacha over a bathtub. A cup is usually drinking water. Drinking water is cooler than bathing water. Second of all, a cup is a kli sheni. Its walls are cold. It did not heat the water. As opposed to the bathtub, which is referring to the type of bathtub where the water was heated within it, and therefore the walls of the tub itself are hot. Now, the bucket has one advantage and one disadvantage. On the one hand, it's a kli sheni. You didn't heat the water in the bucket. On the other hand, it's being used for washing, not for drinking. So it's probably hotter than water in a cup. So what does it qualify as? So the Gemara says that Rav Yosef wanted to say that even though it has only one advantage, even though it has only one reason to count as hot, it counts as a bathtub, and therefore it's forbidden to pour cold water into it. And Abaye says, no, we have Reb Chia, who says that no, it counts as a cup, and therefore it's permitted to pour cold water into hot water in the bucket. So now the Gemara asks, hold on a second, according to the original idea that a bucket which is being used for washing, it counts as a bathtub and it's forbidden to pour cold water into hot water, so how do you ever have a situation in which you could have water to wash your hands, your face, and your feet, which we said earlier you're allowed to do with hot water? So how do you have such an opinion at all? How do you have such a shita? Now, according to Beis Hillel alone, you could just say, very simple, I poured hot water into cold water, and that's permitted. But according to Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, who said it's usher, and the Gemara now is understanding that he was referring to that case where he was arguing on the heter of pouring hot water into cold water. How do you ever have medium heat water that you can use for washing? The Gemara does not entertain the possibility that you had hot water before Shabbos and it cooled off on its own. That is not a tzad. That's not something that's realistic. So the Gemara says, okay, so it's not a problem. That Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was not arguing on the heter of pouring hot water into cold water with both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agreed with. He was arguing on Beis Shammai's heter of the cup, to say that you're allowed that in a cup there's no problem even in pouring cold water into hot water, even though the hot water is on the bottom. That Beis Hillel says that's okay. The kli sheni, Rav Shimon ben Manasseh argued on that. So therefore, Rav Shimon ben Manasseh would agree that you're always permitted to pour hot water into cold water. He was never disputing the hot water and the cold water heter. That's clear. Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, and Rav Shimon ben Manasseh all agree to that. So now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was disputing Beis Hillel's approach to the cup. He's saying that a kli sheni, there's no issue. You can do whatever you want. But that means that Rav Shimon ben Manasseh is agreeing with Beis Shammai? How could that be? Not only that, but we had Rav Nachman who said that the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Manasseh, which means that the halacha is like Beis Shammai against Beis Hillel. We know that that's never true. The halacha is always like Beis Hillel. And he says, no, Rav Shimon ben Manasseh wasn't disputing Beis Hillel. Rav Shimon ben Manasseh was saying Beis Hillel never argued about such a thing. He never said it. Shimon ben Manasseh is disputing the person who wrote the brisa and said that Beis Hillel said in a cup you can do whatever you want. So on that, Shimon ben Manasseh says no such thing was ever said. Beis Hillel never said something like that. The Gemara now continues a discussion of Kli Sheni, and the Gemara says that Rav Huna ben Rav Yeshua said, I saw that Rava was not concerned about Kli Sheni. He said that Kli Sheni does not have the power to cook, even if the water in it is hot. You're allowed to put things into it, and they will not cook. Now that was in accordance with the following brisa. A brisa says you're allowed to take a flask of cold water and put it into a bucket of hot water, because the bucket of hot water is only Kli Sheni. So the Gemara asks, Rav Huna asked, who said? Maybe the only reason why it's mutter there is because you have a flask. You're putting the flask in. The walls of the flask will protect the cold water that's within it from being cooked. But to put actual cold water itself into hot water in a Kli Sheni, who said that's allowed? So Rav Ashi says no. The Brisa didn't say he put the flask in. He said he poured the flask in. He poured the flask of cold water into the hot water, and it was okay because it's a Kli Sheni. Okay, this is the end of this Gemara. This takes us to a Mishnah, and the Mishnah discusses the halacha of spices. And as we shall see, spices will be permitted to put into a Kli Sheni. So the Mishnah says as follows: any Kli Rishon, which is off the fire, okay, so this is talking about a pot, a frying pan, which is hot. It was just on the fire. You took it off the fire. It's not on the fire anymore. So you're allowed to put spices into it. So you're not allowed to put spices into it. Spices will cook in a Kli Rishon. But a Kli Sheni, such as a bowl that you poured soup from the pot into, or a tureen, a serving bowl that you poured the pot from the soup into, that you're allowed to put spices into. So, in short, spices are allowed to be put into a Kli Sheni. Not allowed to be put into a Kli Rishon. Nothing is allowed to be put into a Kli Rishon. But spices you're allowed to put into a Kli Sheni. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says something mysterious. He says, no, you're allowed to put spices into anything except vinegar or brine. So the Gemara asks right away, which case of Mishnah is he going on? He's going on the first half, and he's saying even if it's a Kli Rishon you're allowed to put spices into. He's saying a Kula. He's saying more lenient than the Mishnah, than the Tanakam. He's saying you're allowed to put spices into a Kli Rishon as long as it's not into vinegar or brine. Or is he going on the Seifa, the end of the Mishnah, which said that you are allowed to put spices into a Kli Sheni, and on that Rabbi Yehuda is limiting it. That's only if it's not vinegar or brine. What's that? What is Rabbi Yehuda saying? He's going on the first half, and he is saying a kula. He's limiting the strict ruling, or he's going on the second half, and he's saying a chumrah. He's limiting the lenient ruling of the second half. So the Gemara says we have a brisa where Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that he's going on Kli Rishon. He's saying a hot pot that just came off the fire, you're allowed to put spices into it as long as it doesn't contain brine or vinegar. Now the Gemara wants to know, what is the status of salt? Does salt count as as spices, and you're allowed to put it in a Kli Sheni but not in a Kli Rishon, or is it different? So the Gemara says that Rav Yosef wanted to say that salt is like spices. You can insert it into a Kli Sheni but not into a Kli Rishon. The Gemara says, however, that Rav Nachman didn't agree. Rav Nachman said salt is very difficult to cook. It needs as much cooking as ox meat, and therefore even if you put it in a Kli Rishon, it won't cook. You're allowed to put salt even into a Kli Rishon. Now the Gemara says that Abaye quotes Rav Chia, who disagrees with Rav Yosef, and it's not clear. We have different versions as to what Rav Chia held. He disagrees with Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said that you could put it into a Kli Sheni but not a Kli Rishon. Does he disagree because he says you're even allowed to put it into a Kli Rishon, which is like Rav Nachman? Or does he disagree the other way and he says you're not even allowed to put it into a Kli Sheni, even in a Kli Sheni it'll cook, which is the opposite of Rav Nachman and also not like Rav Yosef. Those are the two versions, and we're not sure exactly which is the correct version of Rabbi Chia. Okay, this takes us to the next Mishnah, which shifts to a discussion of Muktzah, and this discussion of Muktzah will take us to the end of the chapter. We need a brief introduction to the concept of Muktzah. Muktzah is a widely misunderstood idea. Muktzah stems from a halacha called Einei Muchon. Einei Muchon means an object has no actual function that can be used on Shabbos. If it's functionless, then you can't give it a function, you can't use it, you can't do anything with it. Muktzah is an extension of that idea, which says that you can't even move it. Not only can't you use it, you can't move it. And it also narrows what can be counted as a function as far as Hilchos Shabbos. As we shall see, there are a lot of wide-ranging machlokes in between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon as to how we define Einay Muchan. But again, the concept of Einay Muchan, which is pretty much what muktzah is an object which is functionless on Shabbos. Now we're going to meet in this Mishnah two new types of muktzah. One of them is called bittul kli mehechano, taking away the function of a kli. That means that you have a kli which is functional, it's not muktzah, but you do something to it which now makes it functionless. Are you allowed to do that? According to some, you're not allowed to do that. And the reason is because you're pretty much destroying the kli. It used to have a function, you took the function away. You're not allowed to do that. Another possibility why it would be forbidden is because the kli is now immobilized. It's like it's fixed to the floor. It's almost like you built the kli into the floor. It's forbidden to build on Shabbos. Now, the other, let's give an example of that, like if you were to put a muktzah, if you were to allow a muktzah entity to fall into a cup. So that cup now can't be moved, so it's become a muktzah and it's lost its functionality. Now the other type of muktzah which we will see now is called nitel l'tzorech davar hamuktzah. That means you have a non-muktzah object again, and you're taking this non-muktzah object and you're using it for the sake of a muktzah object. Like, for example, if you have an egg, which is muktzah for whatever reason, and you put the kli over the egg to cover it, to protect it. So that the only reason you picked up the kli, the bowl, is for the sake of something which is muktzah. According to some, you're not even allowed to pick up a non-muktzah object if your only purpose is to do something for a muktzah object. Okay, let's see the Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses one case where it's forbidden to do something with a non-muktzah object, and the Gemara will try to figure out what would be the reason it's forbidden to do something. The object is not muktzah, and it must be one of two things: either because you're destroying its function, or because you're using it for the sake of something which is muktzah. So the Mishnah says the following halacha: now let's take a kli, a bowl, a perfectly functional non-muktzah object, and put it under an oil-burning lamp in order to catch the dripping oil. Now that dripping oil is muktzah. Why? Because it's part of a lamp. You can't take the oil out of the lamp on Shabbos. It would be forbidden. Therefore you can't get to the oil. The oil is therefore functionless for you on Shabbos. There's nothing you can do with it. Now, if you were to put a bowl under that lamp and it will catch the drips, it's now catching muktzah oil, which drips. Now the Mishnah continues and it says you're allowed to put the bowl there before Shabbos. That's not a problem. But you can't use the dripping oil because the dripping oil is einay mina muchan. It's einay muchan. It's not functionless. There was nothing you could do with it on Shabbos. It was part of a burning candle. You wouldn't be allowed to take the oil away. Now the Gemara is going to try to figure out what is the reason that you cannot put the bowl there. And again, the two possibilities which will be discussed will be one, because you're destroying its function by having it catch the oil, and then you can't move it because now it's got muktzah oil in it, and it is a base for that muktzah oil. It becomes functionless. Or is it because the only reason you want to move it is to do something for the benefit of muktzah objects? That would be the oil, and that's forbidden. You wouldn't even allow to lift up that kli, the bowl, at all if all you're intending to do with it is to catch muktzah objects. So the Gemara will quote three different approaches to explaining this Mishnah, and the Gemara will have about 5 kashas on each of them. It'll be the same 5 kashas on all three. So first of all, we'll start the first one. The first one is Rav Chizda. And there's going to be 2 ways of understanding Rav Chizda himself. Rav Chizda says the following thing. Rav Chizda says, he talks about a slightly different case. Rav Chizda says, you're not allowed to put a bowl under a chicken to catch its egg. Why would you want to do that? You might be afraid that the chicken will lay the egg on a sloped surface and the egg will roll down and smash. So you want to put a bowl under it to catch the egg. Now the egg, when a chicken lays an egg on Shabbos, it's muktzah because that egg wasn't functional at the beginning of Shabbos. As a matter of fact, it didn't exist. It was inside the chicken itself, so it's non-functional. So it begins Shabbos in a muktzah state and therefore remains muktzah. Now, Rabbi Chizda says, you are, however, allowed to put a bowl over an egg which was laid already in order to save the egg from being stepped on and crushed. Now, what would be the reason for these two halachas? How come you can't put a kli there to catch the egg, but you could put a kli over the egg to protect the egg? So there's going to be a couple of approaches here. So first we'll start with Rabba's approach. Rabba says that the only halacha that's relevant over here is the halacha of ein kli nita l'tzorech davar hamutar. And therefore, both cases should really be forbidden, because what you're trying to do is save the egg, and the egg is muktzah. However, the Rabbanon let you violate this Isser muktzah in order to save your property, to save your egg. But they only let you do it if it is saving from a type of destruction which is common. An uncommon destruction they didn't let you save, just a common destruction. Now, chickens often lay eggs in the street or in the garbage, and people step on them. That's a common thing. So therefore, we let you put a cup over it in order to protect it, because that's a common situation. However, a chicken laying an egg on a slope and it rolls down the hill and smashes, that's uncommon, and therefore they did not let you save that by catching the egg in a bowl. Now the Gemara is going to have 5 kashas on Rabbah, and all of them will be a situation where the Rabbanan let you do something which appears to be an uncommon risk to your property. So Abaye begins, and he says, this is not true, because we saw halacha that if a barrel of tevel is produce which you didn't take meiser from, so if a barrel of tevel breaks on the roof, you're allowed to bring another kli to catch it. Now that tevel is muktzah, because you couldn't do anything with it. You're not allowed to take meiser from it on Shabbos, and therefore you could not possibly eat it. So it's muktzah. Now it's not common for barrels to break. Yet we let you bring a kli in order to break it. Now why would the Rabbanan let you do that? Why would they let you move a kli which should not be permitted, because you're just moving the kli in order to save something muktzah? Why would they let you do that for something uncommon as breaking the barrel? So Rav answers, no, we're talking about a new barrel made of earth. Those break frequently. You don't know if it's a good one or not, and therefore often they turn out to be bad ones, and they break. Okay, next kasha is, we said you're allowed to put a cup under a lamp, not to catch the oil this time, but to catch sparks, to catch drops of flaming material that fall. So it shouldn't start a fire. Now that's also uncommon. So Gemara says, no, sparks are common, it happens, and therefore the Rabbanan allowed it. Okay, we'll stop the daf here. We'll pick up tomorrow's daf discussing more of these halachos.